Well, this month is an important month in terms of India-Australia engagement. Australia hosts the Quad Summit and the Indian Prime Minister will be travelling to Sydney to attend the summit. With me is the Australian High Commissioner to talk about this relationship and the Quad Summit. Sir, welcome to WION. And the first question to you, an obvious question is, Australia hosts the Quad Summit. So what will be the key focus area when it comes to the summit and priorities of your government?
Sidhant, thank you for the opportunity. Clearly, the Quad is a practical collection of 4 countries determined to deliver peace, prosperity and security to the Indo-Pacific. And they're doing that with a practical and positive agenda. A practical and positive agenda that's open to all countries across the region who are prepared to abide by the rules. And so whether it's climate and energy, whether it's infrastructure and connectivity, whether it's health security, what we've seen with Quad activities is practical initiatives designed to deliver that security that any country in the Indo-Pacific needs to be able to make its own decisions, free of coercion, with full sovereignty and with opportunities for their citizens.
Indian Prime Minister is also going to attend this summit. He has been to Australia in the past as well. How do you see his visit firming up the relationship between the two countries, because your Prime Minister was in India just earlier this year and now the Indian Prime Minister travels, even though your Prime Minister again comes back to India for the G20 summit?
It's terrific that Prime Minister Modi will be making his first visit to Australia since 2014. That was a remarkable first visit with large crowds, particularly in Sydney, coming to hear the Prime Minister speak. And this is another signal of how strong the relationship is, that within only months of my Prime Minister making his first official visit following his election to India, a magnificent visit from Modi Stadium through to activities here in Delhi, that Prime Minister Modi will be in Australia to talk further about progressing the initiatives that they decided at the annual Leaders Summit in March, and no doubt putting other things on the table. I think, as you know, your Prime Minister doesn't travel too much, and he's there in part for the bilateral discussion as well as the Quad meeting. What's important, I think, what shows the strength of the relationship is he's not just coming for the Quad, flying in and flying out. He's having bilateral discussions with Prime Minister Albanese again, and he's doing a number of diaspora events.
Diaspora, the people-to-people connect between the two countries is pretty strong. If you can highlight or talk about this people-to-people connect between the two countries?
Well, it's the fastest growing of our overseas-born migrants to Australia. It's almost 1 million people are of Indian origin, either born in India or have one parent born in India. And in a country of 25.5 million people, you notice that. And what we see is a remarkably resilient, a remarkably cohesive and a remarkably productive Indian diaspora who are now fulfilling roles across the breadth and length of society. Our federal parliament has a number of members of parliament of Indian origin, born in India. Our state assemblies have members of parliament and members of the assembly who are born in India. Indians in Australia participate in the full opportunities that are on offer. And we had, when my education minister came to India recently, 16 vice chancellors with him. And they asked me a question as to what more they needed to do in India to promote university education. And I said, you need to do nothing. The Australian Indian diaspora is doing it for you. Their sons and daughters are being educated in quality universities in Australia. They're telling their relatives, their friends, their nieces, their nephews, come to Australia. It's only 12 hours away, the price is good and the quality is high. So that's the sort of benefit that the diaspora is doing. It's helping open up the opportunities for further progress in the Australia-India relationship.
But there are certain concerns as well. There have been vandalization of Hindu temples. There have been violence by certain extremists, the Khalistani extremists. What is the Australian authorities basically focusing on essentially to make sure that there is no repetition of vandalization? We know assurances were given publicly as well, but we saw a recent attack as well in a temple in Sydney.
Prime Minister Morrison assured Prime Minister Modi that we would take every step to uphold our belief that peoples are able to practice their religion free from coercion. And Prime Minister Albanese also said that our security forces, along with our police forces, would do everything possible where such incidents occurred to track down those responsible and to prosecute them. And thirdly, Foreign Minister Wong made the point to Dr. Jaishankar when she was here that unofficial referenda in Australia have no legal status in our country, and that Australia continues to respect India's sovereignty. The bigger issue, Sidhant, is that show me any country in the world, any city in the world, where there's not vandalism and where it's easy to track down the results. But we are following through on Prime Minister Albanese's commitment, which is to ensure that where incidents like the most recent happened, there are investigations. Those responsible will be tracked down, and if found, they will be prosecuted.
Coming back to Quad, what outcomes you're looking at when it comes to critical tech? Because it looks like Quad is doing a lot of work in that sector. We saw last year at Tokyo Summit. Are we looking at key deliverables when it comes to critical tech during the summit in Sydney?
Well, I'm not going to preview the outcome of 4 world leaders, but I think what we know from previous meetings, and of course this is the third Quad leaders meeting to occur. It's the first that's been in Australia, but if you look at Quad leaders meeting, Quad foreign ministers meetings, what we've seen is a practical contribution each time in particular areas. And whether it's health security or now in cyber and critical and emerging technologies, we know as countries that are committed to a free, open Indo-Pacific, an Indo-Pacific free of coercion, that regrettably these amazing technologies we all use to get on with our lives and businesses can also be used for misinformation, disinformation and for coercion. So I expect, yes, you can see more activities going on between Quad partners in relation to cyber and critical technology. There is a task to be done worldwide about ensuring that the rules in which these technologies operate are rules that protect independence and freedom and are not able to be used for coercive purposes. And that's, again, what the Quad does. It shares with other countries in the region. The Quad's agenda is positive, it is open, it operates transparently, and this is where other countries can join in with Quad partners in ensuring that in an area as critical as these new emerging technologies, we not only ensure they're used for the right purposes, but we have rules to ensure that's what they're designed to do.
China says Quad is an Asian NATO. We recently saw the Russian defense minister saying here in Delhi that the Americans want to include somehow AUKUS and Quad into the NATO system as well. How do you see these statements as?
I think they're predictable statements from predictable countries. The fact is that the Quad is a diplomatic alliance. It is not a military alliance. And as I've said before, there is no intention on the part of Australia to turn the Quad into a Indo-Pacific NATO. The fact is that the Quad works constructively together to ensure that other countries in the region are able to make their own choices, that are not subject to coercion. And look, you will have countries that aren't prepared to sign up to the Quad's agenda because they won't play by the rules, say all sorts of things. It won't stop the constructive, positive work done by Quad partners, whether in the past or when they meet in Sydney on the 24th of May.
And any plans for expansion of the grouping? Because there are obviously rumours going around, plans to include countries like Singapore as well. What do you have to say about that?
So you don't need to expand the Quad because everything the Quad does is done transparently. Everything the Quad does is shared not just with ASEAN partners but with other fora across the region, including the Pacific Islands Forum. And so in a sense, the Quad is applicable to all of those countries in that Indo-Pacific region, which is a very large region, who simply are prepared to sign up to abide by the international rules and norms that we believe should govern our lives. And, you know, the fact that, for instance, Pacific countries or other Indian Ocean countries aren't part of the Quad hasn't stopped them being part of some of the measures that the Quad has taken to, whether it's in health security, whether it's in maritime domain areas, or whether it's in relation to energy security. So the Quad's not an exclusive organisation. It's an organisation made up of 4 partners working together to share their expertise, to amplify their effort with other countries across our region.
How much is China worry in terms of it not following rules-based order. It has been putting, of course, a lot of pressure on India in its northern borders, claiming Arunachal Pradesh as well. It has problems with Australia. It has been weaponizing trade when it comes to Australia. How do you see China in a world which is changing fast?
Well, what China does is clear to the world. What Australia and India continue to do is try to talk through the issues that both countries have with that other nation. So in relation to border talks, those border talks continue, and in relation to Australia's trade issues with China, we are seeking to stabilise the relationship by talking to them for the first time in a number of years. Just because we talk to them doesn't mean that we will surrender our sovereignty. We will continue to agree where we can, we'll disagree where we must, but at all times we will protect our national interest. And it's that national interest that Australia and India have that's brought us together as partners in the Quad to ensure that the region in which we live is a region characterised by countries predominantly who are prepared to abide by the rules that the United Nations and others have put in place to ensure that we avoid conflict, that we don't have irritations that can potentially lead to other issues in our region.
So China has been staking claim to regions in South China Sea, Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh as well. Do you think that these irritants are going away overnight? How do you see these area being claimed by Beijing?
Well, the South China Sea is of concern, and it's been the subject of arbitral decisions made by the appropriate bodies that have found that in favour of those countries who abide by the rules. India equally protects its land borders and should continue to protect its land borders, and Australia certainly supports India's sovereignty, and we regret those who seek to change the status quo when it comes to borders. We regret those who instigate conflict, as we've condemned Russia for their invasion in Ukraine. But you know, in life you get a number of elements that will do the wrong thing. The important thing is that India and Australia are working within our region to ensure that overwhelmingly we're joined together collectively to argue for peace, for security, and for countries and citizens to be able to make choices for themselves, not being dictated by others.
And on Arunachal Pradesh, I mean, China...
Well, the point is that the last time I looked at the map of India, it was Indian. Australia respects that sovereignty, and we have previously and we will continue to condemn those that seek to change the status quo because of the consequences, including conflict, that can deliver.
So India is the chair of the G20, and your Prime Minister will be coming to India for the summit. You're also part of the G20. We hosted the summit in the past as well. In fact, Prime Minister visited Australia for G20 in 2014. That was one of his first visits. What are your expectations from the Indian presidency of the G20?
Look, I think, as I've said before, that there could not be a better president for India, for the G20 at this time than India. India understands the need for economic development. The world's had a huge economic hit out of COVID and then out of a war in Ukraine and Russia. And India knows better than most that the way to come out of that is to bring people with you. And India's ambitions for the G20 year, its commitment to sustainable outcomes, its commitments to delivering on sustainable development goals, I think is something that it is peculiar to India to be able to deliver that. Now, no one says that any G20 or G7 meeting is easy, but India is certainly doing a fantastic job, and Australia strongly supports India's presidency of the G20, and we are confident that come that meeting in September of the Quad leaders of the G20 leaders meeting, that we will see a constructive outcome that will further not just economic development across the world, but the attainment of greater equality across the world as well.
India is also going to host the meeting of a G20, I think ministerial or some other meeting in Srinagar in Jammu and Kashmir. How does Australia plans to represent or be represented at that meeting? At what level?
Australia has committed to provide the strongest possible representation at all working groups and meetings of the G20 year, and we are registered to be in attendance at Srinagar. I had the pleasure of being in Srinagar last week. I've seen the preparations being done for that activity. I've seen the convention centre where that meeting will take place, and I'm sure that like other meetings that I've been to, whether in Darjeeling or Delhi or wherever else, it will continue to prove successful as India seeks to move through the G20 year, dealing with those practical issues that the world's struggling with post-COVID and given the economic climate.
So my last question, how do you see India as the chair of G20 perhaps playing an important role, maybe as a mediator when it comes to Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Well, basically, Sidhant, that's beyond my payroll to give messages to anyone about these issues. But look, Australia's position is very clear. We condemn out of hand Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We know that it's not only got a human cost to Ukrainians, but it's having a human cost across the world because of what it's doing to our economy. And you know, your Prime Minister has previously sought to try and bring some common sense to ensure that we do not live in an era of war, and anything he does, and frankly anything any other country does, to try and put an end to this terrible conflict will be welcomed by mankind.
On that note, sir, thank you so much, sir, for giving us time, and we will be going to Australia, and perhaps this will be a very successful Quad Summit.
It will be a successful Quad Summit, Sidhant, which will give you lots to report.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.